Greetings and salutations from Ohatchee, Alabama. My name is Samantha Tollison, and this is going to be my lecture about E.E. Cummings. I'm going to play for you a small bit of the type of music that E.E. Cummings used to listen to. They used gramophones, which was wind up and you had to crank the shaft in order to be able to get the gramophone to work. And it also utilized records and whatnot. So this was the mood that E.E. Cummings was. These were the types of songs and the type of music he was listening to that he was able to draw inspiration off of, or he was able to pull off a more light-hearted feel, I believe, because of the music of the day. He was a stickler that he for nonconformity, I believe. With his structure of poetry in, for example, Wild Bills, it is one of those poems that you see and it forms a picture for some people. It doesn't do it for everyone, but if you take a look back and you think about the subject material, which was Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill was a very famous six shooter, and I believe when E.E. Cummings was writing this poem, he decided that he was going to have it in the shape of a pistol, which, as you can see, it would look just like a finger gun. You know, little kids that go out and play cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, they used to do the little finger movements, which today now is not quite so PC, apparently. But on another note, our teacher decided that we were going to learn about modernism in literature this go, and I got to thinking. I was like, well, what's really the difference of modern um modern poetry and um realist poetry, and the difference between what traditional poetry? And I really got to thinking about this. So being the nonconformist myself, I went and I got my wonderful world book encyclopedia, which it has almost everything. But when I looked at poetry, it says, during the 1800s, the most famous American poets were William Cullen Bryant, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Edgar Allan Poe, and that they were often read by fireside at home or in school, from an anthology book, which an anthology book is a lot of things put together by different authors, poets. For example, in today's time, we have a lot of science fiction and paranormal writers all get together and do paranormal fiction or other types of fiction. And this was also the same back in the day for for a lot of poets to get together and be able to publish their work. Not everyone was like Robert Frost or E.E. Cummings, and um, they had to publish when they could. However, writers such as E.E. Cummings, they already had a whole lot written by the time they were ready to be published. The modernist movement skipped over the movement of of realism and it goes it skips that entire generation. So there was a so to say a generation um, of poetry that was before modernist poetry. But as my encyclopedia states here, it says that modernist poetry leaves out the explanations and narrative connections that provide unity and clarity in traditional writing. It mixes everyday language with elegant phrases and short quotations from earlier poems. Modernist poets place contradictory feelings and events side by side to evoke the disconnectedness of modern life. Modernism was influenced by a poetic movement called Imagism, which lasted from 1908 to 1917. So let me set the stage for everyone. In 1917, America was still not in the war. We were staying out of it. We were minding our own business, and Wilson, President Wilson, was very convinced that we did not need to meddle in anyone else's affairs, and we did not get involved in World War One until the Zimmerman Note. And the Zimmerman Note was very important. It was the entire reason that Wilson finally made the decision and went to Congress and asked for a declaration of war upon Germany, because Germany wanted to invade through Mexico. And this was disturbing because Mexico is right in our backyard. I mean, you hear old people always saying, not in my backyard. Well, this was one of those moments where we could not tolerate having foreign powers that were intent on ending any and everyone and controlling everyone. We face this in modern times yet again. But that's neither here nor there, and that is a different lecture. Anyhow, the more research I did on E. E. Cummings, the more interesting phrases that I kept coming across in different spots. But the best description came out of my World Book Encyclopedia, and I wanted to read you that. It says, E. E. Cummings was one of the most innovative poets in American literature. He is especially known for violating the rules of composition, rejecting punctuation and capitalization, distorting syntax, which is sentence structure, and experimenting with typography, the arrangement of printed matter. He wrote in his own name as e Cummings, and however, Cummings' theme and even many of his forms are traditional. Beneath his poems are complex surfaces, are relatively simple, straightforward ideas. Cumming emphasized the supremacy of the individual over society, and he criticized the tendency of people to conform to socially accepted values and opinions. His poems show him to be joyous and childlike, a believer in love and spontaneity, or spontaneity. So that means that he liked things to be shook up. And it gives his basic rundown of his education, where he was born, which was in 1894. Wow, can anyone even imagine what it was like in 1894? I can't. I can't. This was back in the time before they even had paved roads. They had no running water. Particularly here in Alabama. Um, my great grandmother would tell me stories of how lucky we were just to have running water, to just have some of the modern amenities and everything. And she thought in a way that one day that not my generation, but my children's children, that they would completely be corrupt and rotten to the core because they'd never learned how to work. And it's simply a throwback reading older writers and thinking back at the actual environment that they lived in. You also had Ernest Hemingway running around around the same time periods of E. E. Cummings as well, and he wrote A Farewell to Arms, which was also about World War One in Italy. And the only difference between Hemingway and Cummings, though, was that um, Hemingway didn't get he didn't get arrested on suspicion of treason by the French government. So there is one really big difference. I found out that it was really interesting that after he had been arrested, um, Cummings' father had went all over the place trying to be able to get his son out of the imprisonment, and he finally wrote Woodrow Wilson, and Woodrow Wilson sent a pardon. And that was how he got out of jail. But at the same time, from this experience, Cummings was able to write an entire book after this. It was called The Invisible Room, which was it was really dark. It was interesting. Um, it kind of has sometimes a hopeless feeling to it, but at the same time, you can tell that Cummings himself was always, always hoping that he was going to get out of there, that he was looking towards the future, whatever came. Um, one of my favorite sayings by E. E. Cummings is that it takes a lot of courage to grow up and be who you are. One of my very favorite sayings. I tend to say it to my children a lot, and that Cummings also wrote the poem Next to, of course, God, America I. And this is a very strange sonnet. And I'm going to read it for you. And it says, next to, of course, God, America, I love you, land of the pilgrims, and so forth, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early, my country, 'tis of centuries come and go, and are no more. What of we should worry in every language, even deaf and dumb? Thy sons acclaim your glorious name, by gory, by jingo, by gee, by gosh, by gum. Why talk of beauty? What could be more beautiful than these heroic happy dead, who rushed like lions to the roaring slaughter? They did not stop to think, they died instead. Then shall the voice of liberty be mute. He spoke and drank rapidly a glass of water. Now, there's a lot of breakdown to this one. It's mostly an entire quote of someone sitting there dribbling platitudes of patriotism, even though that they might not even have any idea what patriotism really is. They're just saying the next it might just be saying the next talking point, as the news likes to refer to as today. You'll hear keywords like bombshell, or you'll hear other sorts of keywords that they use all day in the news cycle. Not a lot of people get turned off by this, and they end up not paying attention to current events because they're all just parroting each other. They're saying the same thing over and over and over. And I think today that maybe if Cummings was still alive today, I think he'd be disgusted, quite frankly. I think he would be one of these people that is all about bucking against the system and um not following the exact rules when they don't make any sense. I think as a writer that was one thing that it would hamper his ability to be able to write. And it's hard writing, especially when you're looking at a blank document and you think, what are words? I can't come to any type of coherent thought. And I think that was one reason that Cummings enjoyed using the enjambment type of structure in his poetry, because he didn't care to use punctuation. He didn't care to capitalize things, and it seemed like it was all a run-on sentence, or either one thought bled into the next thought, and that is classic enjambment uh, style. And I think that was one reason that he liked that style so much, because it gave him more freedom in order to be able to write. And it also brought about the childlike um I think that it brought about the childlike way that he was able to get his poetry across. And he was by the time that he had died, they had found that he had written much that hadn't been published, even though there is a great deal of his books that are published. He had also, they released after his death a few of the unfinished things, and that was a really interesting read. And but before he passed, he had won um many awards. Um, Let me refer back to my encyclopedia here. How many he had came across. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't the Invisible Room, it was the Enormous Room in 1922. It was his first book of poems. Um, ooh, can't find them. Let's see. Um, Tulips and Chimneys, 1923, which was his second book. He wrote verse plays such as Him, Amy, which is an account of a visit to the Soviet Union. He also delivered lectures at Harvard. That was interesting. And this is kind of sad. 1962. He was so close to the end of the 60s. I mean, so many good poets and everything came during the time of the 60s. So, it kind of seems a little poetic itself that his end happened in one of, the relatively modern uh, generations that he came about. And then he left in the 60s. He came about in 1894 and he died in 1962. That's a full life. Um, and it didn't mention in the encyclopedia, but I believe it was biography.com that it mentioned that he had uh, a couple of wives, and the actual wives that he married, and then he had divorced both of them, and he stayed with a third common law wife. that he never married, and so he had a pretty full life. It doesn't that there isn't anything that I have been able to find to actually um, prove that there were any children, even though, I'm sure that, um, modern science or whatever would be able to go through 23andMe and Ancestry and all of those DNA testings and everything. However, I'm starting to run out of things to say, and I hope you enjoyed it. This is one of my first times actually using the video on my camera, so I'm kind of confused about how to actually put all these videos together. I hope you have a good night, and happy summer. Everyone, stay safe, stay healthy. Peace out.